Superman movie adaptations have always bothered me. I'm not even coming at this from a Superman comic fanatic's perspective per se. I mean, aside from some select staple issues, I've only read Superman via Justice League or crossover event comics. But for the purposes of a more comprehensive movie standpoint, I did go watch Christopher Reeve's Superman 3 and 4. I think that's worthy of a pity sub and like. I'm coming at this more so as just a person who enjoys stories and its characters. It feels like the catalogue of films we have barely scrape the surface of what a Superman movie could be. In my opinion, I don't see why a Superman film can't have the potential to be the greatest film ever. Because at its core, ironically, Superman in so many ways is the most human fictional character ever. I probably don't need to explain who Superman is for you. I think we can skip that part. Even just a cursory glance at the character communicates this lawful, good, definitive symbol of what it means to be a superhero. These are pretty basic principles to capture on the silver screen, and more times than not, it's successfully adapted. He's a servant of justice because it's what's right, and in any iteration, it's essentially what he's destined to do. He's a sum of his tender-hearted foster parents. It's so obvious. What is there to question? The problem with most of the adaptations is that's all they cover. With a feature-length playground, these properties should only act as the foundations to tell a story, not be the story in and of itself. I'm obviously making an extreme generalization, but Superman films have a very episodic nature to them, where it feels like characters don't have arcs, learn anything, or substantially grow. But ironically, the comics we all unanimously love and praise are the ones where characters do go through metamorphosis. So why don't Superman films routinely apply this? So what can we do for Superman? Now, filmmaking isn't objective, and these are just my opinions, but I feel there's 4 primary approaches you can take to allow the films to perpetually examine the Superman character. I think these can be mixed and matched as well. If your plot passively incorporates any of these to represent Superman, I feel he'll come off way less one-dimensional, become persistently dynamic, and evolving. The 4 approaches are the internal, the external, the Inbetweener, and the why. You can probably tell who the silhouette is, and yes, Barry Benson is a part of my Superman analysis. I'll get to it, just hear me out. One by one, I'll go through each of these pathways with some existing examples of how they're executed. I'll try to stray from central story beats if you were concerned about spoilers, except for the B movie. But if you haven't seen that, I don't even want to look at you. Just leave, you uncultured piece of shit. But most other things, I'll try to keep pretty general and do surface level dissections. The internal.
Am I not supposed to have what I want? What I need? What am I supposed to do?
This approach centers the focus on the personal narrative that supports the broader storyline. The blueprint for the typical superhero film tends to sideline more intimate character beats, putting all of its emphasis on the high-octane segments. While this is a sensible approach for the product it's trying to be, thanks to the likes of Nolan and Raimi at the turn of the century, our standard for character studies within superhero films has inflated. Now, films that still follow this dated model just feel patronizing and comical. Little pun there for you. Now, while I have praised dumb fun films that prioritize action, I think there'll always be good and bad examples. In the case of Superman films, it is just unbelievable the degree in which the writing team just backseats any semblance of depth or personality. I really would describe these moments as water break scenes. Among scenes where Clark isn't wearing spandex, out of the entire catalogue of films, only select scenes from Richard Donner's Superman and its sequel had me engaged. In other franchises, I live for all of these moments. You won't find me yawning when Bruce and Alfred are chatting even about the most mundane things. I personally challenge you to find anyone that actually likes Iron Man more than Tony Stark. If your character can be captivating even during workaday activities, it only enriches the action. Even with superhero films tending to have the sharpest division between personal and overarching storylines among any genre, when the personal is properly developed and treated as the nucleus, these starkly contrasting pieces can sew together through theming and moral parallels. Superman for all seasons. Sorry, something stuck in my throat there. The scenes where we see Goofy Clark with his blocky glasses, juggling his luggage and being all clumsy are truly so great. But to what end? I love Bruce Wayne's playboy persona as much as the next guy, but if that was all I was given, I'd feel like there's a lot left to be desired. In Spider-Man adaptations, I feel I truly get a behind-the-curtains look at who this person is. They also make a point of constantly fortifying the idea through Peter that his powers and costume aren't what make him a hero. It's not their more marketable features such as their powers that make them who they are. And more often than not, these are our favourite moments of these hero figures. If I may be so bold as to assume one of your favourite episodes of Avatar is Tales from Bossing Say.
So you really think I could be a good masseur?
Of course.
This is so great. No one has ever believed in me.
And it's even more painful when time and time again, the source material wields Clark Kent this way. Red and Blue issue 5, we see Clark stop an armed robbery just through conversation. Maybe Reeves' Superman is actually more realistic?
You know something, buddy? You're right. I'm gonna turn over a new leaf.
Good for you, sir. That's the spirit. See, he doesn't really want to hurt anybody.
Right after I rip off this lady's purse.
Of course.
But you get my point. We're granted one of the purest views into color we've ever seen, as Red and Blue repeatedly managed to accomplish during its run. The charm of recycled gags of people not recognizing that Clark is Superman can only get you so far. It doesn't help me understand who he is as a person, like a lot of his own comics and film contemporaries heavily prioritize. Could you even describe to me what Clark's bedroom looks like? I can't even imagine Superman having a hobby, and that just makes me really sad. Oh, he has too many responsibilities to pursue his personal desires? Well, then show us that. It shouldn't be up to me to create headcanon for Clark to gain some sense of individuality or to reinforce his selflessness. I'm not asking for it to be depressing. I know we're all hope maxing right now. It's just the nature of drama to have peaks and valleys. And as long as we don't end the film with bitter or just straight up uncomfortable attempts at character development, I don't think any intimate displays of hardship or sacrifice will make an entire film gloomy. The external. When I say the external, I'm referring to the supporting cast around the protagonist. I've come across a lot of media where the protagonist is essentially a constant. They don't really grow or learn like the internal pathway. But the media doesn't become shallow or thoughtless, rather it tackles the effect the character has on others and follows what they learn. If the Superman property wants to be represented as a constant, as it generally tends to do in adaptations, this is an aspect that's sorely missing. Imagine even just directly lifting this example here. Picture this. Superman saves someone's life, but it leaves them disabled, leading them to grow a disdain towards life. But given time, after re-entering the world and properly living, even through something as ordinary as fishing with Superman every week, they come to peace. Is it just me, or wouldn't that be really cool? Just as part alone is cool, sure, but these moments are what truly make Clark Superman. There's so many examples in the comics that concentrate on similar themes, and we all eat it up. Why are we gatekeeping these stories from the movie format? Another example is Lofi, the main character of One Piece. And while I don't want to completely discredit any growth Luffy has had, in particular halfway through the series, he generally falls into this category of a constant, and the series falling into the category of the external. This is literally the formula of the series. You may have seen in my recent One Piece videos that Luffy isn't in my top 5 characters. In a way, he is my favorite. But as I've been touching on, the property that makes him so good is mainly brought out through others, pushing them to grow, resulting in me turning my eyes to those developing characters more often. My love for Luffy is through the supporting cast. I'd be hesitant to even say that Luffy is the main character in a lot of the arcs throughout the series. If someone were to ask me who the main character of Island Park was, for example, I'd say Nami. Even if you ask me for entire sagas like Alabasta, I'd say Vivi. This doesn't devalue Luffy at all. It's all intentionally designed this way to show how he touches the world and, for the viewer, add legitimate depth in every crevice of this ginormous setting. Substance isn't sparse in One Piece, and it's naturally achieved since it religiously follows this type of formula. It's almost like Luffy doesn't actually exist and he's more a personification of the fighting voice inside your own head. Like your inner will whispering to you, saying the things you truly want to say or truly feel. You argue with yourself and this inner voice tries to pick you back up, but it's up to you to express that externally. The inner voice can only do so much. It'll only help you if you take the step and you keep fighting. We were talking about who is Superman very early on, and another description that's appropriate is the personification of hope. For another example, get to the B movie already. Oh, you're still here. I thought I was just talking to myself. My metrics tell me people have already clicked off by this point. Give me B movie analysis. Okay, just one last example of the external. Look at a film like Princess Mononoke. Very early on, the main character, Ashitaka, learns some pretty heavy news, after which one may assume it would consequently become a very introspective film for this character, but he seemingly gains resolve of the situation in the blink of an eye. Rather than following this personal life and death journey, we follow what almost feels like an errand or a mission. So then what character development will the film examine? Princess Mononoke rather concentrates on the surrounding characters and has Ashitaka act as a mediator of sorts, the constant. And as the film carries out, his nature starts to mold the people around him. Sun, once a pretty androgynous character, if anything leaning towards being rather masculine, progressively softens as she lets down her walls. Due to Ashitaka's sincereness, she unconsciously exhibits more and more feminine mannerisms and qualities.
そなたは美しい。
From a bloodthirsty wolf with a disgust towards mankind, she goes on to even nurse Ashitaka, a human trespasser. Ashitaka's influence can be found through a lot of different factions in Princess Mononoke. If you're familiar with Ghibli films, you know the resolutions aren't going to be so black and white, as Miyazaki always does the courtesy of treating his characters like they're real-life beings with independent thoughts, untethered from a happily ever after script. But it's undeniable that Ashitaka had an effect on each of the supporting cast, whether they'd like to admit it or not. If your character is a constant, do us the courtesy of seeing growth through the supporting characters then, some legitimate evolution. I would love to walk out of a cinema and have Lois Lane be my favourite character. Show us if this character is already the pinnacle, more symbol than man, how they impart their principles and reverberate through those he rescues. The Inbetweener.
What about Caesar?
What about him?
Where does he fit in?
This approach focuses the plot on self-discovery, following a character that struggles to understand who they are. They have an inkling they're different, but why? And eventually they discover their identity is stuck between two worlds. This is one of my absolute favourite character studies and I just never get bored of it. This approach is pretty natural for the Superman character. There's feeling alien compared to everyone else, then there's literally being an alien. We see this story within many genres, particularly in the superhero bracket, just wanting to be normal, just wanting to want, just trying to discover where you fit into the equation in all of this. Superman just happens to be the most extreme subject for this approach. Now, of course, bits and pieces of this has been examined through various Superman films, usually in those that dabble in the origin story. But we've never had an entire film that focuses its central theme into isolation, self-discovery, and self-acceptance. How beautiful would that be? Superman Birthright. Wow, I really need some water, don't I? Let's take a look at the themes of every Superman movie. Half of them are pretty good, but are we really taking full advantage of this very unique subject matter? I know we're in dire need for a more upbeat depiction, and I don't think these stronger topics would sway it from that. Ultimately, the moral would be embracing oneself, not worrying about what others may think and letting your actions speak for you, coming to terms with accepting your uniqueness as a gift and not a curse. Would you consider Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer as a distressing story? Sometimes to get to this, you have to go through this. There are undoubtedly bleak avenues to portray the Superman Inbetweener, but there are also lighthearted social level obstacles to portray as well. The sky's the limit really. Let Clark figure himself out on screen and not just strictly in his adolescence. To the in-betweeners out there watching this video, I bet there's been a countless amount of times you couldn't resonate with people in a conversation. Maybe you even wish you could. Imagine what it'd be like to essentially be an immortal god amongst men. You couldn't go a single sentence without feeling alone. The less we hide or skip the obstacles and idiosyncrasies that make him who he is, the less he'll be perceived as this flat character from days gone by. This was the unanimous opinion in the comic end of things as well, until a resurgence in the early 2000s, and I don't see why the same can't happen on the silver screen. The why. Probably the reason 90% of you are still watching, here's where Barry the Bee fits into all of this. The why refers to an approach that focuses the narrative on finding purpose. Superman's motivation to protect humanity is rather abstract since it's not tied to a specific phrase or even event that becomes so iconic it permanently bonds with the character. While the majority would conclude it's his destiny, or that he's innately good-willed because of his foster parents, I think the fact it is so simple is why it's a repeated point of discussion. The idea's been played around with through different iterations. While not the canonical origin story, Superman Birthright, arguably the most beloved origin story, tethers his motivations to self-discovery. Many renditions have started to ask the why through a personal pursuit, veering away from external guidance. Now, I'm not saying that Jerry Seinfeld wrote the B-movie to be a spiritual Superman origin movie paralleling the purpose of bees to superheroes as a playfully discreet form of activism or something. Or am I? Okay, no, I'm not saying that. But I like the way it handled why Barry does what he does. Like Superman, Barry is given a noble purpose. And again, it's so obvious. What is there to question? Bees make honey. Well, Barry does question his purpose and leaves the hive. Eventually, after some not so subtle bee/human courtship? Yeah, let's just say courtship. He discovers humans farm bees for their honey. Natural next step, he sues the human race, reclaims all their honey, and bees kick their feet up for the first time in millions of years. Barry carved his own path and seemingly becomes a hero. But you know what happens next. With no bees to spread pollen, the world begins to collapse. Adam shares his sorrow, and Vanessa tells her side piece that her floral business is shutting down. This is what I enjoyed. The destiny that was originally imposed onto him didn't have personal significance to Barry like it does now. Yeah, sure, now he understands its value. Yeah, okay, that's cool too. But the added dimension of something more personal is what was missing in his duty. With a greater sense of motivation, Barry hunts down the last trace of remaining pollen and rallies the worker bees to save the world. Happy days. Except for Ken. You might think, well, Clark has Lois, but is she really utilized as a bridge to connect Superman and his duty together? Is she an essential stepping stone that Clark needs to bear the weight of his sigil? Whoever or whatever this crucial final puzzle piece is, I'd love for an origin film to show Clark, then Clark in spandex, then Superman. Does that make sense? Only by the third act can they sincerely adopt their role like second nature. Not by some world-ending incentive, but an intimate catalyst that truly makes them complete. These final act evolutions may seem indistinct from a casual observer. Some may even think Barry just spent the whole film walking a complete circle. What is he, trying to communicate a subjective evaluation of a food's resource profitability that's within a 100-meter radius? No, but seriously. When a character's progress is about defining purpose, their arc may be perceived as trivial since their external actions can in some occasions look the same, since it's purely their internal resolve that's transformed. Like, would you describe Deadpool's desire to save the world at the beginning of the film as the same as his desire to save the world at the end of the film? These nuanced distinctions make all the difference, and it always begins with the micro, not the macro. The main thing I'm drawing from the B-movie is the structure, dedicating an entire runtime to the protagonist's arc, in the context of origin films, not just in the first act. The path of initial resistance, proactively, not reactively, carving one's own path, maybe it not working out, then finding a motivation that bridges the protagonist to their purpose. I'm not saying to withhold the spandex until the climax, he can wear it all through the film, but it would be cool to have an origin film structured in a way so that only by the end does Clark truly become Superman. In the past 2 decades, while adaptations have further reinforced the notion that Superman's a one-dimensional character, the source material has propelled him to another stratosphere of depth and elegance. How is it that Superman movies have stagnated when the original text is going through its strongest run in its 87-year history? Now, I don't despise the Superman movies we have, nor any of its lead performances, including Brandon Routh, who I don't see defended as often as his peers, but I know there can be something more because we're reading it in our own hands. I'm not going to pretend like adapting superhero comics is an easy feat, but when you have a bottomless well that is the source material, it should be a launching point to propel you, not somehow push you back. I coughed on rare occasions to reference the comics that depicted points I mentioned, but honestly, I could have had a coughing fit through the entire length of the video. The variety and approach that the comics have dived into Superman has really left no stone unturned, and that's my point really. Don't be afraid to explore the character. Superman is a property of change. To those that are doubtful, let me just ask you, who was Superman before 1986's Man of Steel? Who was Superman before 2003's Birthright? Who was Superman before 2005's Infinite Crisis? Who was Superman before 2009's Secret Origin? We wouldn't be here without constantly trying to interpret Superman from different perspectives, different approaches. There will always be people that are afraid of additions or renditions, namely executives and producers that want to walk the safest, most vanilla blockbuster path possible. I mean, we're talking about an industry that was afraid of Wolverine's yellow suit for 20 years and Edgar Wright directing Ant-Man because he'd make it too good. Time and time again, we're shown the authors who are the most daring to dissect what Superman is are the ones carried around the room on top of shoulders. As long as your vision aligns with even just the most basic principles, true fans will always give it a chance. I'm reading this right now. To wrap up, let's just remember, there's a reason why adaptations of this property can be made in the first place. Says something about its success, don't you think? So don't be embarrassed about any of its elements and just unabashedly express the story of Clark Kent. Because in my humble opinion, I think it's pretty neat. Thanks for watching my latest video. I've been working on this on and off for the longest time, so I'm glad to just finally get it out. As we're recording this, the trailer for the new Superman movie isn't out, but I can imagine it is by the time this is posted. But what do you guys think just from stills and set photos? I can't get a proper gauge just yet, but I feel the heart is in the right place and that's what's most important, I think. As far as the suit, I don't mind the material, but I'm not too keen on how it lays on the body, if that makes sense. I don't want it tighten like a vacuum, but I wonder if it'll be made to look more flattering in post. But as a whole, my main wish, like many people will probably agree, I just hope it concentrates on telling a singular story very well first and foremost. world building is welcome as a minor accompanying role. Thanks for watching all the way through. Please like and sub if you happen to enjoy, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.